The rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking the city. It came down in thick, angry sheets, blurring the streetlights into hazy orange smudges. Inside the nearly empty Skylight Diner, Manuela wiped down the last counter, her body aching with a deep tiredness that came from being on her feet for 12 hours straight. The clock above the espresso machine ticked past 2 a.m. All she wanted was to go home, soak her sore feet, and escape into a few hours of dreamless sleep before it all started again tomorrow. A sudden, sharp gust of wind rattled the diner's door, making the open sign swing wildly. That's when she saw her. A figure, small and hunched against the storm, was huddled under the narrow awning outside. At first, Manuela thought it was a trick of the rain-streaked glass. But then a flash of lightning lit up the night, and she saw the girl clearly. She was young, maybe 16, and she was shivering so violently her whole body shook. She wasn't dressed for this weather. Her expensive-looking silk dress was plastered to her skin, and her fancy silver shoes were ruined, one heel snapped clean off. She was clutching her arms, her face pale and tear-streaked, her dark hair dripping onto the pavement. Manuela's heart clenched. Her own problems, the mountain of bills, the loneliness of her tiny apartment, suddenly felt small. Without a second thought, she unlocked the diner door and pushed it open, the bell jingling a cheerful note that felt wrong in the tense air. "Hey, you can't stay out there, you'll freeze," Manuela called out over the roar of the storm. The girl flinched, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed too deep for just being caught in the rain. She tried to take a step forward and cried out, her ankle buckling beneath her. Manuela didn't hesitate. She rushed out, the cold rain instantly soaking through her waitress uniform, and slung the girl's arm over her shoulders. "Easy now, I've got you," Manuela said, her voice soft but firm. She half-carried, half-dragged the shivering girl into the warm diner, guiding her into a vinyl booth. The girl, Leora, was a mess. Her teeth chattered, and she couldn't form a single word. Manuela acted fast. She grabbed the thick woolen coat she kept for her walk home, a threadbare but warm thing, and wrapped it tightly around Leora's shoulders. Then she hurried behind the counter and poured a tall mug of the richest hot chocolate she could make, adding an extra handful of marshmallows. "Drink this," Manuela urged, placing the mug in Leora's trembling hands. "Slowly. It'll warm you up from the inside." While Leora sipped the hot drink, her shivering slowly beginning to subside, Manuela knelt. Gently, she took the girl's injured foot. The ankle was already swelling, a nasty purple bruise blooming against her pale skin. The broken shoe was a lost cause. Manuela carefully removed it, her touch as light as a feather. "You took a nasty spill, sweetheart. This needs ice." As she stood to get some ice from the freezer, Leora's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by panic. "Please," the girl whispered, her voice hoarse. "Don't call the police." Manuela froze. That was the first thing she'd been taught to do in an emergency. But the raw terror in Leora's eyes was real. This wasn't a girl who just had a silly fight with her friends. This was the fear of someone who was truly, desperately lost and afraid of the wrong kind of help. "Why not, honey? They could help you get home," Manuela said gently, sitting opposite her. Leora shook her head, fresh tears welling up. "No, you don't understand. My dad," she punctuated her sentence with a sigh before continuing, "he's important. If this gets out, if the wrong people see my name in a report, it could be bad. Really bad for him and for me." She looked down at her hands. "I was followed. I got scared, lost my phone and ran. I didn't know where else to go." The pieces clicked into place in Manuela's mind. The expensive clothes. The sheer, gut-wrenching panic. The mention of important and wrong people. This wasn't just a rich kid who'd strayed too far. This was something else entirely. Calling the police could create a public record, a news story. It could put this girl and her father in even more danger. "Okay," Manuela said, her decision made. "No police. But we have to call your dad. He must be going out of his mind with worry. Can you give me his number?" Leora nodded, relief washing over her small face. She recited a single local number in a shaky whisper, as if it were a secret code. Manuela took a deep breath, her own heart flying to her mouth. She pulled her old, cracked phone from her apron pocket. Every instinct told her this call would change things. The air in the diner grew thick, charged with an energy she couldn't name. Then she dialed the number. The phone didn't even ring once. It was picked up on the first tone, as if someone had been holding it, waiting, their finger poised over the screen. "Speak." The voice on the other end was a low, dangerous rumble. It wasn't a question, it was a command. It was a voice used to being obeyed, a voice that held a universe of controlled fury and simmering fear. It was the kind of voice that could silence a room. For a second, Manuela forgot how to breathe. She gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. She could hear other voices in the background on his end, sharp and urgent, before he barked a single sharp word that silenced them all. "Quiet." Swallowing the lump of fear in her throat, Manuela found her voice. It came out softer than she intended, but clear and steady. "My name is Manuela. I'm a waitress at the Skylight Diner on Elm Street. Your daughter is here with me." There was a sharp, hissed intake of breath on the other end. "Leora." He said her name not as a question, but as a prayer, a confirmation of his deepest dread. "Is she hurt?" Manuela's eyes drifted back to Leora, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes, the warm coat dwarfing her small frame. She wanted to paint a picture for this man, to make him understand not just that his daughter was safe, but how she was being kept safe. "She's safe," Manuela repeated, her tone softening with a natural warmth she couldn't suppress. "She's wrapped up in my warmest coat, and she's working on a mug of hot chocolate with extra marshmallows." She paused, wanting to be perfectly honest. "She had a little accident. She's shivering from the cold, and her ankle is hurt. One of her shoes is broken, so she can't walk properly on her own. But she's a brave girl. She's right here and she's okay." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It was no longer the silence of a predator waiting to strike, but the silence of a storm finally breaking. When Cashin spoke again, his voice was different. The dangerous edge was still there, but it was now layered with something raw, something vulnerable Manuela knew he rarely showed. Tell her Papa is coming." The words were rough with emotion. "Stay on the line with me." And in that moment, something shifted. The connection was no longer just a transfer of information. It became a tether. Manuela could feel his terrifying power, but also his overwhelming fear, his desperate love for his child. It was a combination that was both frightening and deeply compelling. She felt a strange, protective pull, not just toward the girl in the booth, but toward the man on the phone whose world had just tilted back onto its axis because of her. She held the phone to her ear, listening to the sound of his breathing, a steady counter-rhythm to the frantic beating of her own heart. Outside, the rain continued to pour, but inside the diner, a different kind of storm was brewing, and Manuela was now right at its center. The silence in the diner was a living thing, thick and heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beat of Manuela's heart. She could still hear Cashin's breathing on the phone, a low, steady sound that was both a threat and a comfort. Leora had finally stopped shivering, her eyelids drooping as the warmth and exhaustion took over. Then the world outside exploded into light. Not the flash of lightning, but the blinding white beams of headlights. Two massive, black vehicles, sleek and silent as panthers, pulled up to the diner, blocking the street. Doors opened, and large men in dark suits emerged, their postures rigid, their eyes scanning the rainy darkness. They moved with a purpose that was anything but casual. Manuela's breath hitched. "He's here," she whispered into the phone. The line went dead. The diner door opened, and the air itself seemed to change, growing colder, sharper. Cashin filled the doorway. He was even taller than she had imagined, his broad shoulders straining the fabric of his impeccably tailored black coat. Raindrops glittered in his dark hair like tiny diamonds. His face was all sharp angles and grim lines, a mask of controlled power. But his eyes were a different story. They scanned the room and landed on Leora, and in that instant, the mask shattered. The raw, unguarded relief that flooded his gaze was so powerful it stole the air from Manuela's lungs. "Papa!" Leora cried out, her voice a weak but joyful sob. He was at her side in 3 long strides, kneeling before the booth, his large frame making it seem small. He didn't scoop her up immediately. Instead, his hands, which looked capable of immense force, came up to cradle her face with a breathtaking tenderness. He wiped a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb, his voice a low, husky whisper. "Piccola mia, my little one. You are safe." He spoke to her in rapid, melodic Italian, words Manuela couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear: love, reassurance, a father's profound fear finally easing. He carefully inspected her swollen ankle, his jaw tightening, before he finally gathered her into his arms, the woolen coat still wrapped around her. She buried her face in his neck, completely safe, completely home. It was only then that his eyes lifted and found Manuela. She was still standing by the counter, feeling utterly transparent, her wet waitress uniform clinging to her. She had just been a spectator to this intensely private moment, and she felt like an intruder. Cashin rose to his full height, Leora secure in his arms. His gaze was no longer soft. It was intense, probing, sweeping over her from head to toe, taking in her tired eyes, her practical ponytail, her chapped hands. It was a look that missed nothing. "You are Manuela," he stated. His voice was deeper in person, a vibration she felt in her chest. She simply nodded, her throat too dry to form words. "Thank you." The 2 words were weighted, carrying the gravity of a sacred oath. "For your kindness. For your courage." He shifted Leora's weight slightly and extended his hand towards her. Every sensible instinct told her not to touch this man. He was danger-wrapped in an expensive suit. But her hand, as if moving on its own, rose to meet his. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of pure, undiluted energy shot up her arm. It was warm and electric, a startling buzz that made her gasp softly. His fingers were strong, his grip firm, yet he held her hand not like a businessman sealing a deal, but like a man discovering something precious. His dark eyes widened a fraction, and she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that he had felt it too. That spark. That connection. It was there, vivid and undeniable in the space between their joined hands. The moment lasted only a second before he released her, the formal gesture complete. But the ghost of his touch lingered on her skin, a brand. With a final, unreadable look that seemed to memorize her face, he turned and carried his daughter out into the rain. His men fell into step around him, and just like that, they were gone. The diner was empty again, the only evidence of the encounter being the half-finished mug of hot chocolate and Manuela's own racing heart. 3 days passed. Life returned to its normal, grueling rhythm. The diner. The tips. The lonely apartment. Manuela tried to convince herself the entire encounter had been a strange dream, a fragment of exhaustion. But she could still feel the phantom pressure of his hand, see the startling vulnerability in his eyes when he looked at his daughter. It was during the slow lull of the afternoon shift when the sleek black car returned. It didn't roar, it purred to a stop right outside. Manuela's sponge froze mid-wipe on the counter. Her mouth went dry. Cashin stepped out, alone this time. He was dressed more casually in dark trousers and a simple gray sweater that did little to soften his formidable presence. He walked into the diner, and the bell's jingle sounded like a gong. He carried a small, exquisitely wrapped box. "Manuela," he said, her name sounding like a foreign jewel on his tongue. "Mr. Cashin," she stammered, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. He placed the box on the counter. "A small token. For what you did." Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not money as she might have expected. It was a pair of leather driving gloves, buttery soft and clearly expensive. A practical, thoughtful gift for someone who worked with her hands in the cold. It was deeply personal in a way a wad of cash could never be. "You didn't have to," she whispered, touched. "I know." He didn't move to leave. Instead, he slid into a booth. "My daughter is doing well. The ankle is healing. She hasn't stopped talking about you. About the kind waitress with the warm coat and the marshmallows." And so they talked. He asked about her shift, and she found herself telling him about her aching feet. He asked if she had family, and the words, "It's just me," slipped out before she could stop them. In return, he spoke of Leora's love for art, her fear of thunderstorms, how she had slipped away from an overly strict bodyguard to see a movie with a friend she wasn't allowed to see. He wasn't a mafia boss in that moment, he was a frustrated, loving father. She saw the man beneath the legend, a man with a fierce heart and heavy responsibilities. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. He ignored it. For her, he was ignoring the world. When her shift ended, he was still there. He stood as she gathered her things. "Allow me to walk you out." The evening air was cool, the city lights beginning to twinkle. They stood beside her beat-up old car, a world away from his parked luxury. The space between them crackled with the same tension from their first meeting, but now it was warmer, more familiar. "You live a hard life, Manuela," he said, his voice low. "You deserve softness." The words undid her. They were so unexpected, so kind. She looked up at him, her defenses crumbling. The orange glow of a streetlight caught the silver at his temples, the dark intensity of his gaze. He reached out, and this time his touch was not a handshake. It was a whisper. His fingers, so capable of violence, gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear. His knuckles grazed her skin, and a wave of tingling heat spread through her, so intense it made her knees feel weak. It was the lightest touch she had ever felt, yet it felt more intimate than any kiss. He didn't pull away. He leaned in, just slightly, his eyes dropping to her lips. The air grew hot, thick with unspoken desire. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, see the dark flecks in his brown eyes. This was it. The almost kiss. A silent question hung between them, a promise of a fire she knew would consume her. He stopped a breath away. His thumb stroked her cheekbone once, slowly. "Until next time, Manuela," he murmured, his voice a husky promise. Then he turned and walked back to his car, leaving her standing there, her skin on fire and her heart beating a wild, frantic rhythm against her ribs. The world had just tilted on its axis, and she knew, with a terrifying and thrilling certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. The world did not simply tilt after that almost kiss in the diner's parking lot. It shattered and rebuilt itself into something new and dazzling. Manuela's life, once painted in shades of gray and weary routine, was now flooded with color. Cashin did not call. He appeared. A text message would simply read, "Be ready in 10 minutes." And she would be, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. Their world was a secret, a beautiful bubble hidden from the demanding eyes of his business and the harsh glare of her reality. He did not take her to crowded restaurants or loud clubs. He took her to a private observatory atop a silent skyscraper, where the city lights twinkled below like a fallen galaxy. He brought her to a hidden clearing in a moonlit forest, where a blanket and a picnic basket awaited them. In these quiet places, they talked for hours, the conversations flowing as easily as a gentle stream. He learned about her childhood, growing up in a series of foster homes, about her dream of one day owning a little bakery, a place that would always smell of warm bread and cinnamon. She learned about the weight he carried, the legacy of a family name that was both a shield and a prison. She saw the man who, at his core, was not a boss, but a protector. He confessed his love for Renaissance art, showing her a private sketchbook filled with his own surprisingly delicate drawings. He spoke of his dream for Leora, a life of peace, free from the shadows he navigated. One night, on the deck of a secluded boat drifting on a calm lake, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The sky was a velvet blanket pierced by 1,000,000 diamond stars. They were standing close, the heat from his arms seeping into hers. The conversation lulled, and the unspoken thing that had been growing between them finally demanded its voice. "Manuela," he said, her name a soft exhale. He turned her to face him. His hands came up to cradle her face, his touch both firm and reverent. There was no hesitation this time. He lowered his mouth to hers, and the world stopped. This was not the soft, almost kiss of the parking lot. This was a claiming. This was a confession. It was deep and passionate, a storm of feeling that had been building since the moment their hands first touched in the diner. It tasted of longing, of understanding, of a profound sense of homecoming. Her arms wound around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair as she kissed him back with all the pent-up love and hope she had stored in her lonely heart. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, they both knew there was no going back. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Mia vita," he whispered. "My life." He began to weave her into his world, the real one. He brought her to his home, a sprawling estate that felt less like a fortress and more like a sanctuary, with sun-drenched rooms and walls lined with books. Leora's joy at seeing her was a radiant thing. The serious, guarded girl began to laugh again. She dragged Manuela into her art studio, showing her paintings, and begged her to bake the normal people cookies she remembered from the diner. The big, quiet house began to echo with the sounds of their shared laughter, filling a void Cashin hadn't even known existed. Manuela's light pierced the solemn darkness that had clung to his family, and he watched, mesmerized, as his daughter bloomed under her gentle care. He knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the earth beneath his feet, that he could not live without her. The thought of returning to the cold, orderly existence before her was unthinkable. She was the warmth in his hearth, the music in his halls, the peace in his soul. He chose his mother's rose garden for the question. It was a place of pure beauty, a testament to love that could last beyond a lifetime. The evening sun cast a golden glow, and the air was thick with the perfume of 1,000 blossoms. Manuela was admiring a rare, white rose when she turned to find him not standing, but on one knee. Her hands flew to her mouth, a gasp catching in her throat. In his palm rested a ring. It was not a large, flashy stone, but an elegant emerald, the color of deep, everlasting hope, flanked by diamonds that sparkled like their first stars. "Manuela," he began, his voice thick with an emotion so powerful it made her tears fall instantly. "You walked into my storm and became my calm. You saw the man I am, not the title I hold, and you were not afraid. You brought light and laughter to my daughter, and you have given a heart I thought was made of stone a reason to beat again." He took a shaky breath, his dark eyes glistening. "My world is complicated. It is not always safe. But I am asking you to be brave with me. Leave your lonely life behind. Not to be a queen on a throne, but to be the heart of this family. Rule my world by my side. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you have made me. Marry me." There were no words, only feeling. A sob of pure, unadulterated joy escaped her as she nodded, falling to her knees in the soft grass before him. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Cashin. 1,000 times, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, a perfect promise. He kissed her then, a kiss of forever, surrounded by the silent, fragrant witnesses of the roses. The wedding was not a large society affair. It was held in the very same garden, under a canopy of twisting vines and fairy lights. Leora stood as Manuela's maid of honor, beaming with pride. Manuela wore a simple, stunning gown, and when she walked towards Cashin, she saw no dangerous mafia boss. She saw only the man who had chosen her, who saw her, who loved her. He looked at her as if she had hung the moon and all the stars they had first kissed under. As they exchanged vows, the memory of a cold, rainy night and a desperate phone call hung in the air. It was a single thread of kindness that had woven itself into the most powerful, unbreakable bond. It was proof that sometimes, the most forever kind of love begins with a simple act of courage, a warm coat, and a cup of hot chocolate. And so, their story finds its happy beginning. We hope you felt the warmth, the passion, and the power of a love that was written in the stars. If this story captured your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of dramatic, forever romance. We would love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what you thought about Cashin and Manuela's journey. Did their love story captivate you? Thank you for watching.